Hello, everybody, and welcome to the newest episode of the Theater Enthusiast podcast. As always, the hot priest candle is lit. I'm drinking out of my hot priest mug. Today we have writer, director, actor, all around awesome person, speaker, activist. I feel like I'm missing things. Am I missing things? Teacher,
coach.
I
think you pretty much got it.
Yeah. Cool person, even though I literally just met her over Zoom. Please welcome Jessica Blank. Oh, wait, there you go. Oh, yeah. And now I cut out. Hello.
Amazing.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I always start every podcast with, where are you from?
I was born in New Haven, Connecticut. Lived there till I was 8. And then my family moved to DC proper for a while, and then the suburbs, the wilds of Bethesda, Maryland. And then from there, I went to college in Minnesota and came to New York to train as an actor.
There we go. So
I'm from the Northeast.
So
I guess
Northeast,
that's like,
we're from the North region of America somewhere.
Yes, totally.
Yes,
totally.
So what started to get you interested in performing?
I mean, I was like, starting in middle school, I was like just a theater geek. Like I did my first play was Twelfth Night.
Oh, wow.
In 7th grade. I was actually, you know what? Thinking about Shakespeare, it actually goes back a little before that. My parents took me to see Romeo and Juliet at the Folger Shakespeare Theater in DC when I was, I want to say, in 6th grade. And we, this is a funny story, actually. We were not reading Shakespeare in school yet. Like nobody knew from Shakespeare except that my parents exposed me to it. And I remember that production of Romeo and Juliet so clearly. Like my mind was blown. I was in love. And so then I decided, this is the kind of kid I was in 6th grade, that I was going to translate Romeo and Juliet into contemporary, like 1980s slang, basically. So I did I guess like Valley Girl Romeo and Juliet, right? So I translated and condensed the whole play and then cast it, directed my classmates in it, and played Juliet and cast the boy I had a crush on as Romeo, of course, right?
Naturally. Yeah.
So, and but I did all of this at recess over the course of I don't know, maybe a month or two. Like I would sit inside at recess and translate Romeo and Juliet by myself, and then eventually have rehearsals and whatever. And we performed it for the class at another recess. Finally, my teacher was very indulgent and encouraging. And I remember this performance so clearly because nobody can I swear on your podcast?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Nobody understood what the fuck was going on.
Yeah.
Right. Because we hadn't read any Shakespeare. Nobody knew Romeo and Juliet. So there's the vice principal had come to watch and he's sitting in the back of the classroom, ha, 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 loudly laughing at everything. But all of the kids were totally mystified. And I'm like, that's kind of that's the foreshadowing of my career right there. So I was already theater obsessed, Shakespeare obsessed. Yeah. I did a play in 7th grade. That was basically it. Then I was basically this, I got bit by the bug and I was a theater nerd all through high school and with increasing seriousness. And we went from there.
Well, it's really interesting because, cut to, 20 years later, where you are this award nominated and or winning, I can't remember, writer and director, but that kind of started when you were in 6th grade, just from seeing a production of Shakespeare. So that's really cool how, this one little thing happened, cut to all these years later, you're doing it for a living. Who knew? That's pretty great.
Totally. And I think, often for kids, I mean, we see this, I have a 13-year-old daughter who's interested in the business and, you see this as the performance is the way in,
Yeah.
right? Because that's the first thing that's accessible to you
Mhm.
when you're a kid, and it's like hard to imagine being a director when you're young, I think. But it's funny that like, and that was my way in too. Like I was purely a performer, and
Mhm.
then I wrote sort of separately, but I didn't write plays. Um, I was purely a performer for a long period of time, but actually like the genesis of it, I was totally writing and directing
Mhm.
and being a hyphenate
Yeah.
in the very beginning, right?
Mm,
Like, so I sort of circled
yeah.
back around.
Well, that's really interesting you say that, as younger, we're exposed to more of the performance aspect of, getting into this industry. Do you think that there should be more exposure for younger kids wanting to get into teaching them about writing and directing and other aspects of theater?
I mean, it, I think it can only be good for performers to understand more about how things are actually made, right? Like, I think for a lot of actors, like how a script is actually written, how a film
Yeah.
is actually financed, what the
Mhm.
process is like is very mysterious, actually. And that makes life and the creative process difficult for actors sometimes in ways that aren't really necessary. And actually, like in the teaching that I do now, I teach adult actors. I teach in the graduate drama division at Juilliard. I teach a class called Story, and I teach adult actors story structure and how to make their own work. Like they all leave a year with me with a full draft of a full length screenplay or a play, right? So
Mhm.
I do think that that kind of education is really important. And like I know the O'Neill program for a really long time is like it's a semester program during college, and actors apply to it, but you actually make a thing together. So the actors are actually also helping create the work and devise it and put it up. And so you learn all of that stuff. For me, it was hard actually, despite my sixth grade experience, to imagine being a director or a screenwriter or even a playwright until I was a little bit older. Like I think I didn't, it's hard to imagine being a leader,
Mhm.
right, when you're still like in high school.
Yeah.
I think I had to sort of grow into that side of myself, and I didn't actually have, I mean, in the professional world as an adult, I didn't have the skill sets that I needed to direct until I was in my early 30s,
Yeah.
right? In my 20s, I was, it made more sense to be an artist in other people's things. I was working as a playwright
Yeah.
also, but I
Mhm.
think the directing thing actually fell into place last for me in terms of all the things that I do.
Yeah. Well, let's go back a little bit. So you said you came to New York to study acting. So you graduated high school. What brought you to New York? Was there a specific school you went to, or were you just like, I'm coming to New York?
Yeah, so well, I graduated high school and I went to college in Minnesota.
Okay.
I went to a liberal arts school. I actually auditioned for Carnegie Mellon's BFA program, which is where my husband Erik graduated from. He's a
Mhm.
little older than me, so we didn't, cross paths there. But I was driven towards BFA programs. Like I was that serious as an actor, and I got in, and my parents were like, "Look, we'll support you if this is what you really want to do, but we also know you, and like you're interested in a lot of different things, and we think it would be really smart for you to get a BA and like study theater,
Yeah.
but like also give yourself the opportunity to study other things too." Not because they were discouraging of me being an actor professionally in any way, but because I think they just knew my brain, and they knew that there was more in addition to that, right?
Yeah.
So I did wind up I went to a school called McAllister in the Twin Cities, a small private liberal arts school, which was wonderful, but got too small after a year. And then I took a year off and worked in an anarchist collective vegetarian restaurant, which was a totally formative experience. It's actually where I learned how to work.
Mhm.
Um, that was I consider that like an integral part of my education, actually. And then I traveled a little, and then I transferred to the University of Minnesota, where I wound up designing my own major. It was actually kind of great. I came into this huge school as an upperclassman already, so I designed my own major, took like mostly graduate classes, um And I basically was studying what I do now. I was studying creative writing and acting, and then I was doing critical theory and cultural studies around like the politics of
Mhm.
everything I was doing.
Yeah.
And then I had like a little crossroads moment at the end of, because I really thrived in academia.
Hmm.
Um, I'm brainy,
Yeah.
right? I'm a brainy person,
Hmm.
and that's part of me. And I loved the work I was doing academically by the time I really like could study exactly what I was studying. And
Hmm.
part of me wanted to get a PhD. Like I was like, do I want to go further down this road? But my I was really an actor,
Yeah.
and so I was sort of torn about these two paths. And I sort of said to myself, well, I can only be an actor. Now I might not think this is true, but at that time I was like, I can only be an actor if I like seize on that now. If I go and train and go to New York and like really do the thing now. I
Hmm.
can always write. Nobody has to hire me to write.
Yeah.
And I can always read books and talk about them with people. And if I want to wind up in academia, I can do the route where I don't get a terminal degree. I make my body of work as an artist, and then someday somebody will ask me to teach, which actually is kind of what wound up happening. Like I started
Yeah.
teaching at Juilliard about 5 years ago. So once I sort of made that decision, then I knew I knew that I was brainy, and that as an actor, that was actually something that I would need to learn how to deal with on a technical level,
Hmm.
right? That like you can rely on your brain as a writer. You
Yeah.
can rely on your brain as a director. I
Hmm.
think writing and directing work are also deeper and better if you're also working from your body and your heart and your emotions and not just your intellect, but you can lean on the intellect, right? In the more authorial positions. As an actor, if you lean on your intellect, you're screwed, right? It's great to be a smart actor, but there's a lot of other things that you have to have facility with, right? So I was like, okay, what is the and in college I hadn't encountered acting technique that actually helped me navigate that, right? Like a lot of what I had encountered was more method, more Stella Adler. Like I was being taught a lot of script analysis,
Hmm.
right? And like all of that, if you're already a brainy person, like I was like doubling up on that, like and getting in my head about memory and all this. And I was like, okay, what is the technique that's going to break me out of that, and that's going to train my spontaneity. And I was very lucky to encounter a PhD candidate at the University of Minnesota who had been in New York and been in the downtown theater world in New York, spent over a decade here, and had trained in Meisner technique. And
Hmm.
so he was running this like informal Meisner class out of a loft in Minneapolis that he asked me to come join. And as soon as I started doing repetition work, as soon as I started doing Meisner work, it like unlocked a whole thing. And I was like, okay, that's what I need. So I said, after I graduated, I was like, I'm moving. I had a brief flirtation with Los Angeles. I had representation out there that was trying to get me to go out there. I went out there for a minute. I was like, I can come back here later, but like if I come out here as an untrained 22-year-old or whatever, this is going to eat me alive. Um, and I came to New York and I was like, who is the best Meisner teacher in New York? I did a bunch of research and a bunch of asking around, and I found Bill Esper, my amazing late teacher, who was, the heir to
Hmm.
Meisner's. He was, who Sandy's handed the technique down to, and an absolutely extraordinary teacher. And so, yeah, I came and I trained with him. It's a 2-year program at the William Esper Studio with Bill. And he taught me an enormous amount of what I know, not only as an actor, but as a teacher, as a director, as a playwright. Like everything I make is based on principles I learned training with him.
Yeah. So what do you think are the most important principles that you learned with Meisner that you bring into your acting, directing,
Oh,
teaching,
wow.
writing?
I actually wrote, I wish I had access to it right now. I wrote a post about it right after Bill died, where I boiled down all the things that I learned from him. Specificity is really huge. I mean, I think that the idea, the understanding, it's not an idea, the understanding that all of us are inherently enough, right? That the specificity of human behavior is endlessly fascinating and complex, that our behavior and our actions carry our psychology and carry our emotion, right? So that, like, you know, I think there's a lot of acting training that's about focused on how to deal with emotion and how to deal with psychology, how to analyze psychology, and like those things are all really important. And also, if you leave yourself alone and you connect fully in a present way with the person who you're working with, and you allow your behavior to emerge spontaneously, with, of course, a very precise understanding of all your homework about the given circumstances and all, right, all of that, that what emerges is fascinating and beautiful, and you don't have to try to be interesting. Like we're working as storytellers with the material of what we already are, right? It's a condensed and distilled version. Storytelling is a condensed and distilled version of real life, right? The stakes are higher, the boring parts are removed, right? Things are more highly structured, but the raw material of what we're working with is not like some kind of interesting thing outside ourselves that we have to manufacture.
Yeah.
It's all already here.
Yeah. And now that you say that, I mean, based on the things that I know that you and Erik have written together, now it all makes a little bit more sense with your writing, that what you've done together. So let's talk about, because we spoke about a little bit of the acting. Where did writing start for you, aside from, you know, converting Romeo and Juliet into 80s slang?
Right.
Yeah.
After that, what happened? I mean,
Couple
I
of years
actually,
later.
yeah, so I actually had an incredible poetry teacher in high school. He was the poet laureate of Maryland. I was really like very lucky that he was teaching at a high school. So I took like AP creative writing class in high school. I repeated it a few times because I just wanted to keep studying with Dr. Galvin. So I actually wrote poetry first. And, you know, started in high school. So some of it was bad poetry for a while, but then, like, you know, I became a halfway decent poet. It wasn't just sort of sentimental, emotional venting. Like I was working with language throughout college too. And then when I came to New York, so as a kid, I was really always very bad at sports and afraid of sports, and like didn't want to let the team down, and I was a little klutzy, and you know, I stayed inside at
I
recess
feel like a
translating
lot of
Shakespeare, right? Like
theater,
that's the kind of, yeah,
I feel
right.
like a lot of theater people
So
be like, what's sports? So yeah, I understand.
right, totally. So like competition was scary to me, and when I came to New York to act, I was like, I'm gonna have to get over that, right? Because it's an incredibly competitive business. And I was like, I need to train myself to not be freaked out by that, by the competitive aspect of what I was doing. And I was writing poetry. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to get involved in the poetry, in like the spoken word poetry world, and start doing poetry slams. Because what better way to throw yourself into the fire than to get up on stage, perform, and have your performance literally numerically ranked by judges in a flat out competition where there is a winner, right? And I'm very lucky. I found it amazing. I mean, New York City at that time had an incredible spoken word community with a lot of really amazing artists. It was like right before Def Poetry Jam on Broadway, and like those were a lot of my friends from my community in that show. And HBO had a poetry show. So I worked with some great people. I did that for about a year, and it totally did exactly what I wanted it to do. And like by the end of it, I was like, yeah, sure, somebody's ranking me with a number, I don't care, right? And I also learned something in doing slams, that like I noticed that the poems that sometimes you get somebody who's just a great performer, right? So they do really well because they're compelling. But if I looked at the actual writing, the poems that did really well consistently were A, well performed, but B, followed a certain structure and had a beginning, middle, and an end.
Yeah.
Increasing narrative tension, a resolution, right? Like they actually followed a story arc.
Yeah.
Right. So I was starting to play with story arc, or at least story structure in my poetry before I started writing anything that was actually a story. And then partway through my first year in acting school, I met Erik. And we got the idea for our first play, The Exonerated, which is a documentary play based on interviews we did with death row exonerees across the country. We got that idea like within a month after we started seriously dating. So that project, that play really wanted to exist in the world. It had, I mean, I know this maybe sounds woo-woo, but I really quite concretely experienced it as having like an intelligence that was larger than us, and it wanted to be in the world, and it used us for 5 years to like get these stories out.
Yeah.
And I mean, it had, as soon as we started working on it, it had this like crazy momentum.
Yeah.
I mean, not that it was easy. We ran out of money a million times along the way. And once we got on the road and started interviewing death row exonerees, and I started hearing those stories, I actually stopped being able to write poetry. Spoken word poetry is largely autobiographical. I was like, I do not give a shit about like my own emotional stuff that I'm getting up on a stage talking about. Like, here are stories with real life and death stakes, right? That encompass all of these larger questions about who are we as a society, right? But are also totally compelling on a personal and individual level. And I wound up letting go of being a poet and immersing myself totally in the stories of the exonerees we were talking about, or that we were working with for 5 years. And then sort of things continued to develop from there. But that was definitely a big turning point.
Yeah. So you talk a lot about if there is a story that keeps, sirens are happening outside my window. Welcome to New York, everyone.
New York.
So you keep talking, or you talk about when, people, if there's a story that just can't get rid of in your head, that it keeps popping up, you need to work on it and write it down. Was that what you found with The Exonerated? Because if anybody who's listened to the podcast, listened to Erik's episode, he does talk about how the idea of The Exonerated started. Do you want to talk a little bit about that as well? And if this story just stuck with you and that's how you were like, yes, let's do this?
Yeah, I mean, so we had been dating. I mean, I'll repeat, it's a story that maybe some people have heard before, but we
But it's
had
from
been
your
dating
perspective of
for a
it.
couple of
So
months. Right,
yeah.
totally. We had been dating for a couple of months, and I brought him to a conference on the death penalty that I was going to. It was like a, politically oriented conference about mass incarceration and the criminal justice system and the death penalty. And he likes to say that it was early enough in our relationship where he would say yes to anything I asked him to do. I asked him if he wanted to come with me, and he said yes. And we were at a workshop at the conference on a group of cases called the Death Row 10, which were a group of wrongful conviction cases in Chicago, guys who had had confessions tortured out of them by a particular police commander who was found to have done that and fired. Much later, he was actually prosecuted for it and has died now. But at that point, he's just been found responsible for it. And these guys were still sitting in prison, several of them on death row, many of them with no other evidence against them besides these quote unquote confessions. So we heard a lecture from, I don't know, an attorney or activist, somebody, and then we saw some like 60-minute style documentary footage on the cases, and it was all very disturbing, but really in an intellectual way.
Mhm.
And then the organizers had set up a phone call from one of the guys in prison, and they hooked the phone up to a speaker so that for a few minutes he was talking to us in the room. And he just, I mean, it was only a few minutes. He told a very simple version of his story, right? It
Mhm.
wasn't anything elaborate, but by the time the authorities got wise to what was happening and cut off the call, everyone in the room was in tears. It was a totally different experience than the sort of hour of information that we had just been receiving, right? Erik, being, unfamiliar with these activist circles, sort of looked around the room. He was also crying, but he was also like, this is bullshit, because here we are having this very emotional experience, but like, these aren't the people that need to be having this experience. Like,
Yeah.
the people that need to be having this emotional experience are people who think they don't care, right?
Mhm.
And we started literally writing notes back and forth to each other in the back of the classroom about like, how do you get around that preaching to the choir problem, right? And we were both interested in documentary theater already as a medium. And we got the idea in that conversation on paper to travel around the country and interview exonerees and make a documentary play from their words. And so, yeah, as soon as we had that idea, it would not leave us alone. We went home, we did a couple of months of research on the subject because we knew we needed to educate ourselves. And then we just started calling everybody we knew and asking for help. We called journalists and asked them how to do an interview. We called playwright friends and asked them how to write a play. Like,
Yeah.
um, we sort of gathered all of our forces. And then I think once we were out in the world with the idea, because, it's one thing to write something fictional. You can do that by yourself at the computer for a long time before you ever share it with anyone,
Mhm.
right? But documentary work, you have to engage with the world from the beginning, right? In order to get the interviews, in order to even gather the material. Like, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was operating as a producer actually to just get our writing process going and like make all the connections and form the relationships that I needed to in order for us to even get these interviews in the first place, right? Let alone travel around the country and do them all.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, once it was going for sure. And I think but once we had the idea, we knew it was like, it felt like an abdication of responsibility to put it down.
Yeah. So I want to touch on directing a little bit. So, because you direct a lot of the work that you and Erik work on, you also have directed films that you've worked on as well. So, how did directing
Mhm.
start for you? And especially people who want to get into directing, how would you say the best way to start would be?
So, I'll get to the second part of that
Yes.
question in a second. And
Yeah, of
because it's
course.
also a different answer for plays than it is for movies or
Yeah.
television.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so like, like I was saying, I think so we started work on the Exonerated when I was 24 years old,
Hmm.
right? So I was really I was in my first year of acting school, like I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I was not ready to direct yet. And we had an incredible director for the Exonerated, Bob Balaban, who, like, a lot of what happened with that play was possible also because of his work on it. He was
Hmm.
really a major collaborator. Um, and so that, the life of the Exonerated was about 5 years. It ran for a couple of years off Broadway. There was a national tour. We wrote a book about the making of the play. It was adapted into a film, which Bob also directed. We adapted. And so I think I learned a lot actually from watching him
Hmm.
over the years. Erik and I did co-direct a small production of the play before it opened in New York at the Actors Gang Theater, which is Tim Robbins' theater in LA.
Yeah.
Which really was great for us and gave us a chance to finish the script in a very hands-on way and was a wonderful experience. And I also knew that I wasn't ready to do it in New York yet.
Hmm.
I just had more to learn. And then actually during the life of the play, there was a really incredible actress who was in our cast in New York named April Yvette Thompson. And she and I became friends. And it as the play was running, it became really clear that she was not only an extraordinary actor, but an extraordinary storyteller, and came from a family that had a lot of incredible stories. Her family background is political and complicated, and there was a lot there. And I asked her at a certain point, I was like, have you ever thought about writing a solo show? And she was like, I've wanted to forever. I've started a bunch of times. I haven't gotten it over the finish line by myself. And I was like, okay, I don't know what it's about, but like, let's figure it out. Let's co-write a solo show for you. And so we spent a couple of years working on that script, which became a play called Liberty City. And as I was working with her on shaping it, I think part of the nature of it being like that she was a co-writer and the performer, and it was her story, like it put me as a co-writer even in a directorial position with the work, right? Like after a while, it was like we weren't just co-writers, we were also actor and director. And so I saw that and I named it, and you know, I was like, oh, it makes sense for me to direct this. We agreed that that made sense. So that got done in New York at New York Theater Workshop, I want to say in 2008, maybe 7. And so that was my first time directing. So like my first, really for real, like, so my first time directing a full production by myself was a full-on off-Broadway production at New York Theater Workshop. So I went in the deep end right away and felt so supported, and was working with Jim Nicola and Linda Chapman, who were extraordinary artistic directors. And I just realized that I totally loved directing theater and that I felt totally at home doing it. And so the next play that Erik and I wrote was also for a New York Theater Workshop. It was right after that. It was a play called Aftermath, based on interviews that we did with Iraqi civilian refugees in Jordan in 2008. And so I directed that, and it made sense. It made sense both to Erik and I of like, oh, I'll direct our plays. Like it just felt correct. And so I have ever since then. And then I sometimes direct other people's plays too. I'm choosy about it because we have a lot of projects that are our own. That take a lot of time. So I think you have to be sort of, if you really want to forge a career specifically as a theater director, at the beginning, it's a little bit more like being an actor, like whatever opportunities there are to develop new work, whatever you come across, you have to sort of say yes to and throw yourself into that. So that is not something that makes sense with the way that my work life works. So with other people's plays, it has to be like really something I'm vibing with, but I do that as well. And then Erik and I direct together on camera. So we're filmmakers together. And it's nice. We have a nice division of labor. He's a visual artist also. And so he tends to work very closely with the DP. He storyboards. He's into making shot lists with that stuff. I'm like, great, you guys come up with it, and then I'll go through it and talk it through, like which is the way I work with my designers as a theater director also. It's like, come up with stuff and then show it to me and I'll give feedback. Erik likes to be generative on the visual side. I really like words and I really like people. So as a film director, like I'm very involved in pre-production. I'm usually a producer also on what we do. And then I love dealing with the actors. So in terms of advice to people that want to direct, I think in the theater world, it is, I mean, if you want to direct new work, it's about finding the playwrights that are your peers, that are in your world, that are making the kind of work you want to make, and partnering with them early on to develop plays with them, right? Like it's about getting involved in the development process and doing readings and workshops and all of that. And then eventually that starts turning into productions and you build from there. If you want to direct film, either you go to one of the top couple of film schools, right, which will make you do this in the context of school, or you just figure out how to do it on your own. You have to make a movie. Like you just have to write and direct a film. And once you've and that's what you got to do to pop your cherry, right? Once you've popped your cherry, then you turn that into other kinds of opportunities. But the entry point into directing on camera is that you just have to figure out how to do it.
Yeah. So I have a two-part question that relates to theater into film. So you've adapted some of your work to film, or it's going to be film. One of your books you turned into a film. And
Mhm.
also, how is it as a theater director going into directing a film, even though you do say that you co-direct with Erik, but how is it transitioning from theater director to film director?
So what was, sorry, tell me the first part of that question
So
again.
what is it like adapting your work, whether it be one of your books or a play, into a
Mhm.
film? Because I know you do have one of your plays. Um, Erik said it was the Lester Bangs play, How to Be a Rock Critic.
Yeah, How to Be a Rock Critic. Yeah.
Yeah, which I already told him, like, I am happy to be an extra standing in the background for that. Because,
Amazing.
like, I told him, like many other people, like, I was introduced to Lester Bangs through Almost Famous. So,
Uh-huh.
and that's one of my favorite movies. So again, happy to be in the
Awesome.
background
Us
for
too.
many scenes if needed. And then one of your books that you wrote, you also adapted into a film. So what is it like adapting work that didn't start off as a film or an idea as a
Mhm.
film into film, and then being a theater
Got it.
director directing film? Sorry, I
Got it.
had a
Okay,
stress
so
test today and
let
I
me
just realized I have a sticky still on me. Sorry. I'm good.
so okay, so the first part first. So
Hmm.
I think a lot of the work that Erik and I do as writers, even if it's not strictly adaptation, it
Hmm.
has a relationship to adaptation, right? So like we make documentary theater where we go out and we do interviews and we have those interviews transcribed and we construct the script out of raw interview transcripts. We go from anywhere from like 4,000 to 20,000 pages of interview transcripts to like a 50-page play, right?
Hmm.
A lot of what we are doing right now in the television space is historical. So, which is not totally different, right? Like there's
Yeah.
a deep, broad research process where we're working with stories of things that have already happened and then figuring out how to translate them, shape them into television shaped storytelling, whether that's ongoing or limited series, right?
Mhm.
Um, our first film, Almost Home, was an adaptation of a novel that I wrote. So that novel was totally fictional. I did make it up completely from my imagination, right? It wasn't based on something, but then, a novel is a very differently shaped thing than a screenplay,
Yeah.
right? So the process of taking a novel, which is a lot more material always, and boiling it down into the structure of a screenplay, it's a similar process, right? And then with the Lester Bangs piece, it's like there's sort of two layers there because that play, How to Be a Rock Critic, was adapted from Lester's entire body of work. We worked with his estate over many years. So, hundreds of thousands of pages of things that he wrote. We
Yeah.
adapted that material into a one-man show. And then after that, now we're getting ready to make the movie. We're raising the money for it and putting the team together. We adapted a one-man show into a full-on screenplay, which is not like a filmed version of the one-man show. It's like the Lester Bangs movie about his life, right? So I think everything that we do almost has an aspect of
Mhm.
taking material that exists in one form and structuring it into another form, right?
Mhm.
Um, Very rarely do we make something up out of thin air. And I don't know why that is, except that that's a process that we're both really interested in. And like, how do you, and maybe it goes back actually to what I was saying about some of what I learned from Bill, right? That
Yeah.
like, our raw material is real life, right?
Mhm.
Like, there is beauty and transcendence and horror and awe in the raw material of people's actual lived experience, and not just famous people, but
Yeah.
ordinary people too, right? So I think there is something in what we do that is about like looking at that raw material and then learning to filter it through the prism of dramatic structure or cinematic structure
Mhm.
into something that can move audiences, right? So it can communicate, can be the compressed, condensed, distilled, more beautiful, more horrible, more moving version of itself, right? So I think that's why, you know, everything we do in some form is an adaptation. And I'm fascinated by that. Often when we have a story that won't leave us alone,
Yeah.
we'll work with that story in multiple mediums before we're done with it. I mean, our play Coal Country, which is our most recent doc play, which opened at the public March 3rd, 2020. And then we did a remote, yes, right. Then we remotely recorded it for Audible during the pandemic, and then very gratefully reopened this past spring of 2022 with the public and Audible at the Cherry Lane, and got our full run, and then took it down to West Virginia to the community where it's about. We're now making a documentary film that is about the underlying story and the encounter between the community and the play, and the right. So like, we're not done with that. And we have a television pilot that is about the same part of the country 100 years ago, which is an extraordinary historical story. So, you know, that'll often happen with us. There's like a piece of material that clearly like we're meant to be in relationship to.
Yeah.
And we'll work with it in multiple forms until it's done with us.
Yeah.
To your second question about like what it's like to direct theater versus what it's like to direct on camera. I mean, I would say I know people that are like truly pure filmmakers, right? Like that's really their medium, is on camera directing. I've never felt like a film nerd in that way. I love working on camera and I love running a set. But like I said, I think it makes a lot of sense that I co-direct with Erik on camera, because a lot of the like much more camera specific aspects of the job are things that he really has an affinity for. The technology and the machines and the visuals and lenses and like all of that kind of stuff. Again, I like people and words, right? Yeah. So if I had to put myself in a box, I would say by temperament and nature, I'm probably more purely a theater director, right? I like to have a month with the actors to figure out what the performance is, right? Like, as opposed to just like a day with somebody who comes in to do their work that day, right? Like, I like the longer term digging in exploratory process with actor and text that theater allows for, and filmmaking allows for that also. And those are the parts of filmmaking that really excite me.
Yeah. So how did Juilliard come about into your life to teach there?
Totally organically and serendipitously. And yeah, it was something it's sort of, honestly, it fell into my lap. So I work as a coach also. I work long-term with private clients, mentoring them and guiding them in making their own work. And I like to say I coach in all of the things I do. So I work with playwrights, I work with actors who are writing their own material, I work with solo artists, I work with screenwriters, I work with independent directors who are putting their first film together. I work with television writers, showrunners, staff writers, new television writers, all different levels, privately. And so and I love working with actors, turning writers, right? Like that's a sweet spot that I particularly enjoy. And so I was at a moment in my coaching practice where I was like, I want to reach more actors who want to write, because I like working with them. And so I was like, I really should just forge relationships with the acting schools in New York and come in and do a weekend thing about making your own work and sort of see what's out there. And so I had a very good friend named Lee Colston, who is an absolute genius. I will plug his play, which is a masterpiece called The First Deep Breath, is about to open at the Geffen in LA with him starring in it. Anybody who is in Los Angeles must go see it. We're flying out to LA to see it. It's incredible. He's a Juilliard grad. He graduated from their MFA acting program. And he was like, I've had the conversation with him, and he was like, oh, let me introduce you to Evan Yanulis, who runs the department. And, you know, you can picture your workshop and they'll probably want you to come in. So I sat down with her and I described the work that I do and my approach to teaching and my story methodology. And I pitched a weekend workshop. And she said, as soon as I was done, she was like, well, you know, it's really funny that you're in here because we have decided with the MFA students have been taking a playwriting class, but we've decided to phase out that class because it's too specific to theater. We're training actors that are working on camera. Most of them are not necessarily going to be playwrights specifically. They may not even wind up working in the theater. They may wind up going to LA and working primarily on camera, but we still need them to understand story structure. And we also, in the 21st century, need to be training them to be creative entrepreneurs and to make their own work in addition to just, you know, hopefully getting hired by other people.
Yeah.
And she was like, it sounds like what you teach is kind of exactly the way we're conceptualizing this course. We haven't opened up the application process, but please apply. And I put in my application and I got hired a couple months later. And so I got to, in, you know, collaboration, obviously with the department, design the curriculum for this class that hadn't existed before. So I teach them, I get the MFA graduate students for a year. And I teach them story structure. We do a few, you know, several classes that's just sort of me downloading, you know, Aristotle and Joseph Campbell and my own methodology, which is grounded in the neuroscience of story as it relates to 3-act screenplay structure.
You actually posted something yesterday on Instagram that I thought was really interesting because you were talking about like mathematics of like how you write something out. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Just I mean, I think that, yes. Well, look, I think not to get too heady about it, but I think with other art forms, right, I think people get very preoccupied when it comes to story mediums with the idea of talent.
Yeah.
Right. People are obsessed with like this idea that like great actors are great because they're talented. Great screenwriters are great, or playwrights are great playwrights because they're talented. It's this like mystifying, mysterious thing where we don't have a shared language culturally for like how story works or what it is. So we just say, well, that person must be brilliant if they made something that's great. Whereas with music, with visual art, we understand that like a great songwriter is working with pre-existing forms. There are mathematical patterns in music that already exist, scales, chords, music theory, right? In visual art, there's compositional geometry, there's color theory, right? There are these things that are pre-existing that great creators are learning to work with, which is like, I identify that's craft, right? Learning to work with those pre-existing patterns is craft. And those pre-existing patterns to me are their sacred geometry, right? They parallel the mathematical patterns that underlie all life forms in the universe, actually, right? We don't understand commonly as a culture that there's the same thing with story, right? And so a lot of what I'm dedicated to as a coach, as a teacher, in particular, is, and in my own writing practice, I'm fascinated with structure, right? And the adaptation process actually teaches you a lot about structure, right? What are the forms that if you craft them correctly and the pieces click into place, will invite life force to inhabit them, right? Just like nature, right? Cells and atoms they're structured in certain ways, right? If a cell is structured right, it will support life, right? And I think craft and art have the same relationship. If the structure is constructed right, it will support the life force that is art. So that's a lot of what I teach. It's something that like actually anybody who has the drive to work really hard to learn can learn. And then if you bring yourself to it courageously in all of your divine specificity and don't shy away from that so that your voice is then inhabiting those structures, then anybody can learn to make great work. If they want to. It's not something that's reserved for the chosen few or the talented. So sometimes I feel a little bit saucy at Juilliard because it's, you know, it's Juilliard coming into class and being like, by the way, guys, talent is a myth. It doesn't exist. It's bullshit. Sorry, you've all been told you're the most talented at what you're doing, but like, actually you're craftspeople, right? Actually, it's about skill and discipline and practice, and then courage, right? So that's a lot of what I teach. And then my students in my class there, they all develop their own idea, and we go through, I have a pretty concrete step-by-step methodology for story building. And we
Which,
go
if you
through
want
that
to
over the
learn
course of the
about,
year.
work with Jessica and she will guide you through it.
Yes, totally. Yeah. I do. I work with that with my private clients. My website is jessicacblank.com, and I'm Jessica C. Blank on Instagram, and very reachable there. They leave my class with a script, with a full-length feature or a full-length play or a solo, that they can then continue to refine up to professional level if by the time they graduate, they've decided they want to be professional writers as well as actors. They have the tool that they need to take into the world to start building that.
Great. So we're coming towards the end of the podcast now. So I do have like 3 quick things. I always ask top-going theater experiences. I do ask the inside the actor studio questions, but that's last. But I will ask, do you have any dream roles or dream projects or something that is a dream of yours to work on or do or perform? Right? Direct?
You know, I have to say that I am pretty lucky that a lot of what I'm doing right now are things that have been dream projects for a really long time. So it's just a matter of like hoping we get financing or sell them, right? So we're developing a television project with David Simon, who has been a model for me as an artist for decades. I think The Wire is the absolute best piece of television ever made, maybe storytelling, period. At least all contemporary storytelling. I think it should have won the Nobel Prize for literature. And his work has been a model for me for a very long time. So I'm really lucky to be developing something with him. The television project that I mentioned that's set in West Virginia 100 years ago, which is about an extraordinarily dramatic piece of history called the Mine Wars, is another one where like we haven't taken it out on the market yet, but I really, really, really hope it sells and that we get to do at least 3 seasons of it, because it again feels like something that encapsulates so many things that I've been drawn to make work about for so many years are in this one story. And I would really love to be able to just hang out in this story for 5 years. I would be thrilled. And then there are some things that we're working on that like haven't necessarily been like a long time dream, but that like I'm super excited to get to do. We just had a new musical commissioned for the public. I'm not a musical theater geek. Like we will bring a composer on board to do that part of it. I never thought that I would write a musical, but now that it's in front of me, it's really exciting. And the idea of and I'll direct it also. So the idea of getting to direct theater on that kind of ambitious a scale, right? Even if it's a simply staged musical, it's always more ambitious, right? Than a straight play. So that's exciting to me too. So yeah, right now, a lot of the stories that I'm working with are things that I've dreamed about for a really long time. It's just a matter of now we got to get the financing for all of it.
Yeah. What about your top, aside from Romeo and Juliet in 6th grade, what have been your other top theater going experiences?
Oh, wow. I have to think about that for a minute. I mean, I think about things that I saw recently that blow my mind. I mean, actually, Erik is in the collaboration on Broadway, the Warhol Basquiat play. And they were very generous with comps during previews. So like, and it's a brilliant play with incredible performances.
Well, that's how I got Erik on my podcast, because I messaged the PR people and I was like, I loved this show. I want to have somebody come on from the show. And that's how it happened. I loved it.
It's really extraordinary. And so
Mhm.
I saw, and you know, one of the things that it's very beautifully directed. Kwame Kwei-Armah is an incredible director. Um, and one of the things I say about particularly naturalistic theater direction, when it's great, you don't see it the first time you see the play. It's invisible
Yeah.
because you're on the ride of the play if the director is really doing their job, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like very lucky that, you know, I just, whenever we had friends going to the show during previews, I would just go with them, which gave me a chance to see the show repeatedly and really study what Kwame was doing as a director, which has been a really wonderful recent experience. Now that I'm thinking about it a little, about formative shows. I saw when I was in college, actually at Macalester, they brought Roger Genvier Smith's solo play, A Huey P. Newton Story, which is just absolutely extraordinary. Spike Lee filmed it. So it is out there in a way that people can see. Which was, that really broke open my ideas about what was possible with the theater the first time I saw that. And then I saw it a couple more times. Like I saw it in New York at BAM a few years later, and it was different, which
Yeah.
was really amazing. I actually did not get to see her early work live, but Anna Deavere Smith's early work was also an enormous formative model for me. Like, when I was in college, she was kind of the only person out there that I saw that was like doing all of the things that I wanted to do. Like, she was an actor and she was a writer and she was working journalistically, and her work was immediately politically engaged with things that were happening right now, and the way she works with language and character, like all of that was like, that, okay, if she can do it, I can do it. So I think there were, like, you know, I don't know if they were masterpiece theater or great performances versions of her two early shows. I was
think it's
sadly not
somewhere
able to
like
see them
that. Yeah.
live, but they were very formative also.
Yeah. Okay, so finally, we're going to do hopefully a quick round of the Inside the Actor Studio questions. So, what is your favorite word?
Fuck.
Love it. What is your least favorite word?
Actually, I just want to say one thing about the word fuck, which is that everybody needs to find the fuck scene from The Wire, because that explains why it's my favorite word. There is a scene in, I think it's the first scene of The Wire, first season of The Wire, where there are two detectives who are putting together a narrative of what happened at a murder scene, right? And the entire scene, the only piece of dialogue is the word fuck. And it is transformed to mean 200 different things over the course. They tell a whole story using just different permutations of this one word. So the reason why it's my favorite word is because it's demonstrated in that scene is because of its extraordinary versatility.
I will say that when I was in college, they filmed inside the actors studio at the theater I worked at in my college. And Matt Damon did an episode. And one of the questions I will ask is, what is your favorite curse word? And he said, fuck. He's like, you can use it in so many different ways.
Yes.
So
It
it's
can
true.
mean anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Least favorite word.
Oh, God.
Part of me kind of just wants you to say shit.
No.
Okay.
My
No to shit
least
means it's
favorite word
no.
is no.
Yeah.
My least favorite word is no.
Yes. I mean, no is your favorite, and I'm saying yes as in
Yes.
awesome. Okay. What turns you on?
Humanity, specificity, presence, love,
What turns you off?
cynicism.
What is your favorite curse word?
It's got to be fuck again.
What sound or noise do you love?
Oh, I love the sound of my husband's laugh.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Hmm. I mean, the subway when it's pulling into a station right next to me, but that's a boring answer. Like, I feel like there should be
No,
something more
if that is your
metaphorical.
answer, no, we don't have to get metaphorical at all. This is what you feel, and that is your least favorite sound, and that's fine.
Yes, like intrusive machinery. I don't like the sound of intrusive machinery.
I understand that. Yeah. What profession other than yours would you like to attempt?
Ah, I mean, I already have like 5 jobs, so it's kind of crazy to think about another one because
Well,
I
that's
really
not one
do
of the
do
five.
all of the things. Right, that's not one of the 5. So I can't be a teacher, I can't be an actor, I can't be a director, I can't be a writer. I mean, I love to cook. Maybe there's a universe where if I didn't have to deal with meat, because I've been a vegetarian since I was 11, where I would be a chef.
Yeah. Well, they have
I also,
vegan or vegetarian chef. They have
yeah,
meatless meat,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. I think that because that's something because I also went to like gardener for a minute because like the piece of like working with the material world close to nature with my hands is something that I love that I don't get to do enough in the work that I do. Um, but I think if you're a chef, you get to also be an artist,
Yeah.
right? So I'd work with food in some way.
What profession would you not like to do?
I never want to work in a cubicle in an office. I mean, what is the Lloyd Doubler quote from Say Anything? I don't want to manufacture anything bought or processed, process anything manufactured or bought, or buy anything manufactured or processed. Basically that.
It's been a very long time since I've seen that movie, so I will take your word for it. And finally, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Oh, wow. There's more.
And as Mr. Lipton would say, here are your students. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything else you wanted to add, ask, share, life advice? Where tell people again where they can, if they want to work with you or if they want to follow you on the Instagram, where they can
Yeah, this
find
was
all that.
great. Yeah, so the quickest, easiest place to find me always is on Instagram, Jessica C Blank. Don't forget the C. There's another Jessica Blank out there who's like a graphic designer, so she's got all the like plain old Jessica Blank stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, Instagram is great, and I check my DMs from people I don't follow. So I do, if people want to reach out to me about coaching and stuff, they can find me there. And then my website is jessicacblank.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. You can stay on quickly after I stop recording. Thank you everyone for listening. And then, and thank you again. Okay.